All right, everybody. Welcome to the IAM webinar today about moving data. I am very excited for this conversation. It's been something that I've been working on for a number of years, and we feel like we can make significant progress on this issue now that we've kind of connected with the folks at the International Air Transport Association. When we talk about moving data, we are the International Association of Movers, and every single day our members move household goods shipments. But you're also moving data, you're moving information, you're moving documents. And you have to do that in order to provide the service that you've promised to your client, whether it's another, moving company or, a shipper, whether it's a government shipper, a corporate client, or a COD shipper. You have to move this information in order to provide that service. But you also have to move that information in those documents in many cases to get paid as well. And that has been increasingly identified to us as one of the biggest pain points many of our members are facing every single day is getting paid and getting the information to where it needs to go to provide the service and get paid. So with that out of the way, I'll introduce our speakers for today's session. First, this has been a bit of a godsend is connecting with IATA and specifically Henk at IATA. Henk is the head of digital cargo at the International Air Transport Association. He is going to be giving an overview of the One Record platform and initiative that IATA has pioneered. And this has been, for us at IAM, a bit of a light in the darkness. In general, it felt like this project to connect our members, connect the various software systems, felt like an awfully big project when we looked at it in the past. But IATA is already doing this in the air freight sector, and our members are already engaged in the air freight sector. They're already defining data standards and protocols. So I'm very excited that Henk has been able to join us today to showcase kind of where that organization is moving to and how IAM, our members, and our industry can get on board with that. But before we get to Henk, I want to introduce the chair of our Data Solutions Initiative, Mr. Alvaro Stein. Alvaro has been a key IAM volunteer on this project since the very beginning. And I just want to allow Alvaro to introduce himself, and then we'll talk about a little bit about the current state of things in the industry before having Henk light up our brains and show us the light later on. So, Alvaro, please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Brian. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here today. I'm as excited as Brian to share this with you and the journey that is ahead of us. A little bit of my history. I joined my family's logistics business in Chile 20 years ago, gaining experience in customs brokerage, freight forwarding, before I eventually fell in love with the moving industry, like most of us here today, I assume. And since I started, I was shocked by the low level of digitalization in the industry and the disconnection, not just in moving, but in the entire supply chain. Our customs broker business handled 10,000 files per month, all paper files. They were piling up in the desk. It was crazy. More than 300 people typing data. And it worked. There were some mistakes, everything, but it worked. So I was dreamed from that moment about a future where all those documents were replaced by data that would feed our systems automatically, and we were able to feed our data to our clients' systems as well. During my time as Decapac, as the CEO of Decapac, we formed a team to drive innovation. I learned the hard way about the challenges of managing IT projects and most importantly, managing change. I realized that our own digital transformation was not complete or enough if we didn't have our partners and our entire supply chain also in the same level and exchanging data. So a couple of years ago, I stepped down from the CEO position to follow this dream. I explored what other related industries were doing in terms of data sharing and standardization. I experimented with emerging technologies that would enable this transformation like blockchain, IoT, and artificial intelligence. I joined the IAM Tech Committee and later the Data Solutions Task Force to continue driving this. We were able to make progress, as Brian mentioned, but it was challenging. There were some things like how do we manage security, how do we manage who is who and authentication, that we knew there were going to be barriers eventually. So we thought that we were far from the results. But eventually our collective effort and our work led us to discover IATA, the One Record initiative that they were pushing forward. And we realized immediately that that framework solved all those barriers that we were facing in our work. So we connected with Henk and his team and found many things in common. We deepened our understanding of this One Record standard framework, and even we installed things locally in our computers. We're able to test it and see how it worked, until we finally felt we are ready to reach out to all of you and invite you to join, showing you how it is and participate in a collaborative journey. Our goal is to help you understand it, transfer the enthusiasm. This is possible, this is ready, we can do something now, and we want to help you understanding what is required from you to adopt it and to participate. Like most projects, again, this is an iterative process. Not everything is defined at the day one, but we learn in the process and we continue refining it and taking more of the value of the project. Looking forward for the presentation and to working with all of you to make this a reality, and we can really unlock the potential of exchanging data seamlessly. Brian.
Yeah, Alvaro. So thanks for that introduction. And you hit on some things: the low level of digitalization, security, privacy, etc. One of we ran a survey of our members last year, and the number one um, challenge or opportunity we identified in that survey was our members were struggling to keep up with changes in technology. And I think this is one of the big reasons why is it is so hard to obviously adopt technology, but also share data in a way that's really easy and doesn't cost too much time and money. So you hit on some things already, but I like to start with the why before we get to the solution. So Alvaro, you've been in that position. You were running a company in Chile, struggling with the data requirements from clients as well as your fellow partners around the world. Can you maybe kind of just discuss some of the challenges that we've identified, and then we'll kind of look at some of the polling data that we solicited from members before the webcast started?
Sure. When we were drafting this slide, it was hard to pick one because all of them are, in my view, are important and were pains during my time at Decapac, and I'm sure that they're painful also for every other company that is here. So the typical case when we receive a bill of lading, for example, with the wrong name of the transferee, we have to make a change. It costs money, and there may be delays. How much time we're so used to that. We have more people typing and usually solve it with typing. We are required by our big bookers and relocation management companies to feed data direct into their system. If we're lucky and we have a strong IT department, we can build those integrations. It's challenging when you're building more. And if we're not, we just have to type the data manually. There's, I don't know, like 10 different platforms that we use at Decapac that are not our own platforms that we have to feed data to. And that demand will only grow in time. So managing that, we know that compliance, cybersecurity, sustainability also will require us to send our data, hopefully in a standard format. So there's many different parts in the process that we're used to. We think that there's no better way to do it, but now there is. So let's see what the presentation is about.
Well, first off, Charlie, if you can share, the data that we got from when at the beginning, can you share that poll? And so you can see, we only got eight out of 48 of the people participating, but I think it is somewhat representative of some of the challenges everybody faces. Specifically, I think we all face that repetitive data entry. How much of a pain is that? Alvaro, any other thoughts you want to provide on this on this poll before we get to Hank?
Would be interesting to know, to have the response from everyone, but I agree that this is representative. It's hard for me again to pick one. I think we can all relate to some of this. I'm not surprised that the number of integrations was the lowest one, because most of the companies, medium size, smaller size, we don't have the capabilities to build those integrations. So I'm not surprised with that. But we all live day after day with a repetitive data entry into different systems, and we're used to it. We hire more people to complete those tasks. And the errors and mistakes that causes in the supply chain, just again, we're used to it.
Okay. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to turn it over to Hank. Again, Hank is the head of digital cargo at the International Air Transport Association. Hank, why don't you go? We've kind of presented the why. The current status quo is cost, time, and money. Show us the better way that's out there.
Okay. Let me share my screen for starters, and then hopefully you can see this. Get rid of that. So hopefully, yes, hopefully what I have to say will help a little bit. Certainly the questions you put on the screen just now and the survey, if we'd done the same thing in air transport, we would have got the same answers. We have the same problems. And so in this case, the approach to data sharing that we have developed at IATA, and we say it's really with the entire industry, with our membership. This is not a little team, it's hundreds of people that have worked on this, address the same issues. I'll be using language from air transport because I know it well, but at the same time, we are moving data just like you. So one of the things I'd like to perhaps start with is why we're doing this. Yes, we're solving problems like having to type in data multiple times, having issues with errors and stuff like that. But there's a lot more to it than that. A lot of the issues that you mentioned in your survey and in your list of questions are the problems we have today. We're going to have other problems tomorrow, and more to the point, lots of opportunities that we're missing because of the issues we have today. And so let me get rid of this window. Hopefully you can't see that. Geez, I'll try to do that. Oh, there we go. So a few things. Firstly, this is about data sharing via the web, one record. It is truly at the forefront of innovation in global trade and air cargo operations. And you will see by the time we finish why I can say that. We are doing things that were simply impossible not that long ago, or even today in many cases. It is also a requirement, the need for improved efficiency, the need to be able to give guarantees around security of our goods, but also of our data, and as well as our impact on the planet and sustainability, require a different approach to how we work and how we share our information. This is, in my case, about the digitization of the air cargo supply chain. But when we say the supply chain, we mean end-to-end. And that includes all the way from the party that needs to ship or send something to the party that receives it. So by definition, actually, the moving industry is part of this. But obviously, on our side, we started with our focus on our membership, the airlines and their immediate customers. But ultimately, the vision was to be able to have this working for everybody, including even for other transport modes. It is also about creating a single digital record. And it isn't that I have a central database or something. We don't. It's distributed. The data is all over the web, but it's linked together into a single virtual or distributed record, but it gives complete visibility of the data from end to end. And then lastly, it's important that this works for everyone, not just two companies that have actually made an investment to talk to each other, digitally speaking, but for everybody in the supply chain. Again, in our language, airlines, forwarders, and ground handlers, but you can substitute this by moving companies and by agents and et cetera, et cetera. So it's different names for exactly the same function. So what are the challenges that we have? And in a sense, the questions you ask, you'll find the questions here as well. although IATA has made a huge effort for more than half a century in standardizing data, for a lot of that, it's a very limited scope, like airlines and agents, basically, to keep it simple. But that's not enough, because the freight starts somewhere else and it ends somewhere else, far beyond these two parties. And the result is that data is fragmented. It's all over the place. The details of a shipment may be in one place that may be needed for customs, but the customs doesn't have them. And so data is fragmented. And one of the issues you get when you start fragmenting data with systems that are not connected is that you cannot guarantee any quality of data or integrity. The data that starts perhaps at the party that ships is not necessarily the same as the party that receives it, because it keeps being copied and typed manually, and lots of errors are being introduced. And that is basically the bane of our lives in air transport as well as in yours. Then on top of that, you get cybersecurity challenges. The increased complexity of our digital world. I mean, by 2025, 25% of the global economy is going to be digital. That means that all of these organizations, governments, etc., come up with new compliance in order to guarantee the society will function, and economy will function. We are subjected to that. And then lastly, we've always had a challenge with technology. Not that we're not good at it, of course we are, everybody's good at it, but we didn't have good ways to share data. We had a really hard time integrating with new technology that comes up. Big challenge in getting everybody to adopt certain technologies. And then the infrastructures we use are not necessarily compatible. So these are the challenges. Now, what One Record promises, and we'll see later why it will actually make good on that, is that it actually standardizes data across the entire supply chain, not just for an airline and its operations, or a forwarder, or customs, but for everybody. And we found a way to do that. And then we have standard APIs. In fact, they're very, very smart APIs. They're smarter than most APIs you'll come across. And that is, again, it's by design. We had to do that so we can communicate seamlessly, that we are able to give real-time data access to all parties in the supply chain, which then gives complete visibility. And when you say complete visibility, you've actually answered most of your problems. You've solved most of your problems. And then I mentioned earlier on the increased compliance, the complexity of compliance, and the changing international rules, and all of that we will be able to deal with from a data sharing perspective. So before I go into explaining how it works, I'm going to explain why we need to do this. And sometimes I do the other way around, and then people say, yes, now I understand how it works, but how do I justify this? How do I build a business case? So this time I'll start with creating the business case first. Ultimately, One Record is another investment in a solution, right? It's perhaps the best way to put it. But it's more than just implementing some sort of new approach to IT or data sharing. What we found is the concepts are so different in a way that creates so much opportunity that the further you look into it, the more solutions you find. And then each of these solutions has a value in itself. So let's look at some of them. Some of them are obvious. Increased efficiency, most of which you were talking about earlier on in your survey and others, had everything to do with the inability to share data correctly. In many cases in air transport, and I have no doubt it's the same across every mode of transport or type of business, there's a lot of paper-based work still. And so that in itself, if you can just remove the paper, you've already increased efficiency. But it's more than that. It's the avoiding the retyping of information, avoiding having to translate things between systems to integrate them. All of that is inefficient. And so we can address that. And so when we're building the business case, that's an important one. Enhanced visibility. When we started One Record, we did a survey among our shippers, which are the party that starts it all. And they put it very simply. They said, when we transport something, it's like it disappears into a black hole. We have no idea where it is, if it still exists, or when it's going to arrive. And that was a general complaint from the parties that use these transport services. One Record actually deals with that. Not only do we allow for real-time tracking using tracking devices, the actual access to information gives you a complete access to all of the different statuses as things move forward. And you will see a little bit later how we do that. It's a big benefit. Cost savings. I won't say too much about that. Take the points you raised earlier and translate that into cost to you. Alvaro already referred to that. There's a lot of cost that is going into our existing exchange of data systems. Data security. Of course, modern data systems, they need to be secure. We have to worry about cybersecurity and other things. But also think about the security of your current solutions. Worst case, you have a stack of documents lying on a desk or in the cabin of a truck. How secure are those? They're probably not very secure. Or you have integrated systems. Can you guarantee the security of those systems? Did you actually meet some requirements, or were they developed 20 years ago, 15 years ago, where the security requirements were of a different age? And so data security is not a luxury. It's an absolute necessity. And then lastly, interoperability. This has always been the key point. I mentioned we want to have an end-to-end solution that works from shipper to consignee in our world. But what we've seen, and this is certainly the case for you as well, that goods are not just moved by air, but also moved by rail or by maritime or by road or even barges and sometimes. And so all of these different modes also have to interoperate. And the approach we've taken allows us to do that. And we have done a number of implementations involving air and maritime, air and barges, air and road, etc. So that sounds like a big promise, right? Now we have to try and keep that. So let's look a little bit where we've come from. Most of you will recognize the image on the left. In fact, most of us remember this with great fondness. This is the time when data technologies were more or less started, the time of the cassette tape. And already then we had solutions. Then in the 90s, we got the World Wide Web, which changed everything. Then we got mobile computing in 2007. And now we're in the era of AI, which again, creates a completely different environment in which we operate. If I now look what's happened in air transport. In air transport, we embraced EDI, electronic data exchange, back in the 60s. And until this very day, 2024, 95% of all airlines use EDI systems that were designed 50 years ago. They've upgraded them, but it's the same concept, that are completely incompatible with cloud technology, modern APIs, artificial intelligence, one record, blockchain, and you can continue with the list if you want. And this is a problem. The problem is that on the top side, our lives are now transformed by technology like AI and mobile, there already are, but our business is not. And I'm being very, very kind and optimistic here. There's still a lot of paper in our business, just like it is in yours. And so you can replace the EDI by paper and realize how far off we are from able to do modern business in 2024 using technologies that we're actually working with today. So without going into a great level of details, air transport has always been forced to innovate rapidly. And the reason is that we provide global transport chains that are very quick. Within 20 hours, you can go from one end of the world to the other side using multiple airlines. And so the data has to move at least as fast as the airplanes, but ideally a little bit faster. And so we have great paper standards, we still use them. We have very good data messaging standards, which are in use today. We now have one record, which provides us with a lot more, and we'll dive into that. But the point I actually put here, and that's why I put the slide here, is that by the year 2030, you can be certain of one thing, and it's that the entire world will be operating in what we call data spaces. Forget paper, forget difficulties of connecting systems. It's going to be 100% about data, and we'll be using artificial intelligence to consume that data. We'll be trading data. And so data, we may be able to solve problems today with what we do, but in the future, our current solutions will be so backward and behind that we may not survive as businesses. So there's an imperative here. So let me look at how does it all work, right? I'm using an example from air transport, but it won't be that hard for you to superimpose your own world. In a minute, I'll show you your picture, but this is the picture we work with. We have shippers, which are the people that originate the goods. They're being picked up by origin freight forwarders or origin agents. They may have to do things like dangerous goods declarations. They deal with the customs. They create waybills or bills of lading, depending on the world you come from. There's warehousing involved. There's somewhere along the line, of course, there's an airport, and the goods get put into the aircraft. They fly to another destination, and then it's the whole thing, the same thing in reverse. You still have warehouses, you have import customs forwarders, and then the consignee. That's the transport picture. And again, as I said, you will recognize this quite easily. Now, today, we used to do peer-to-peer data messaging. If there is data connections, it's mostly peer-to-peer or point-to-point. You have one company, an agent has invested in a system, and perhaps the customs have another system, and they, of course, they've integrated them to make the declarations. Okay, so we have ad hoc integrations with systems that are out there, IT solutions. That is what it is. That immediately leads to problems. Data duplication. When systems aren't properly connected, which they're not, you are forced to copy data. You have to copy the address of the party that is shipping. You have to copy the data that's inside a packing list. If it's not automatically transferred, you're going to have to copy it. In many cases, this stuff comes in on paper. Now you have to actually start copy typing it from paper. This then leads to lots of errors, right? Lots of errors in doing that. There's no data visibility because the actual original data is not passed on. If you're lucky, it's copies, but most likely not all of it anyway. So there's limited visibility. There's very limited data security. Even if the data security of the system is perfect, which it may be, once you have sent your information to a third party, you do not control what they do with it. If they decide to print it out and leave it on a desk and go home for the weekend, you have no idea what will happen to the data you sent to them, so you don't control it, right? Once it's sent, it's gone. And then in practice, certainly in our world, we had issues with data length, where we, for example, a very long address didn't fit in the systems that had been built maybe 10, 20 years ago. So that's the world you already know, so nothing new here. So what is one record? How do we do this? And this is where we're going to spend a little bit of time in going through that. Same world. We haven't changed that. It's still forwarders, airlines, warehousing, customs, shippers, consignees, exactly the same picture. But what we do is that all the data that's here, and in these blocks you can see what it is. There's invoices, packing lists, waybills, manifests, import good declarations, release documents, dangerous goods declarations, the whole shebang. In air transport, we have about 30 to 40 documents. They're not all on this picture here, but there's many of them. And so instead of trying to send these documents electronically, say from a shipper to a forwarder, what the shipper does is they take the information that they have, for example, about the goods, and they put that online. They essentially almost, it's like creating a little web page where the information they have goes there. It's a hidden web page, you can't see it, but that's sort of the concept here. And everyone else does the same thing. When the forwarder creates a bill of lading or a waybill, they put it online. So in other words, it's a piece of data that is on the internet. It has a URL being the thing that you would normally type into a web browser. So all of this data is now on the web. And so it quite physically is on the web. In fact, I just screen copied this one before the presentation. We have some data here. In this case, it has something to do with the shipment. It has a number of pieces. There's a freight forwarder, there's a shipper. And if you look carefully on top of this little block here, you'll see there's a URL, the sort of thing that you would type into a web browser. And of course, it's a very long URL with lots of complicated letters in there, so you can't just guess it. And what's more, it's HTTPS, and so unless you have been authorized to see the data, you won't. But that's the concept. All the data stays where it is by the party that creates it. And that leads to some very interesting solutions. Firstly, The party that creates the data, for example, an agent that creates a packing list, we call them the data holder. We used to call them the data owner, but then the lawyers got angry at us that it was the wrong name. So the data holder is the party that has created the data and has full control over it. No one else can do anything with that. They can share it, they can send a link downstream to other parties, but only the holder, in this case, the origin agent, has control over the data. That same data holder also controls who can access it. So that means that when they put that data out there on the web, on the internet, they determine if somebody wants to see that data and they type in the URL in their system, it's the holder of the data that determines whether or not they get access. If they get access, great, they can see the data, they can see the packing list, for example. But if they don't get access granted, then all they get is a blank page that says, sorry, access not granted, right? Just like the bank or whatever. Visibility. So these first two are really important. It deals with a lot of the issues that you already have. Then visibility. Because we leave data where it is created, all we do is sharing links to data. In fact, if you look back, you can just see it just above it. In fact, let me go one back if I can do that. No. If you look at that browser here, what you can see is that each of the elements actually is a URL or a URI, right? So even inside the documents, somebody controls whether you get access to that or not. It's not just the whole document. Even inside a document, we have full control of our data. But the data is linked. And so what we share is the links to the data, not the actual data. And that means that if you now go back to the original picture with all of these, the invoice, the packing list, all of these things are now linked to each other, created by different parties. And now we have a whole web of data, which means that assuming you get access, you get full visibility of all the data from the beginning all the way to the end during the entire process, including updates to the data. So complete visibility, again, within the limitations of access as it's being granted. Accessibility, how do you get to the data? Well, I've sort of explained it now. The data it has its own URL, it has its own web address. And so when a system needs to get the data, it just goes to that web address and pulls the data. We call them logistics objects. They're like real objects, but actually they're data objects. And then transparency, another thing that I think has tremendous opportunity. Any party that fits into this supply chain, in this process model here, has the ability to send events and say, I have packed this movement is ready, or it's been loaded in the truck, or it has departed at the airport. So we can send events. And then on the last point, anybody that is authorized to know about this will be automatically receiving notifications. You don't have to call up. If something was loaded, you already know it before you've even asked for it. So there's this whole process there. This is the picture of your world. And I'm looking at my clock. I'm going to accelerate a little bit because I'm going to have some time for questions as well. So, you have the relocation management companies, the corporate accounts, the actual people that you're moving. There's a party in there, right, in the center that is doing the whole thing, booking it all. They're probably the origin agent. Then there's a bunch of carriers in between, and there's the destination agent. So if I take your world and I transpose it onto our world, in fact, these two are very, very similar, which you already worked out by now. And so in the picture, and that's the last thing we're going to show you, we have the concept of an organization, of a person, of a shipment, of a packing list, and so on. We have another 30, 40 different things like waybills or goods declarations, you name it. And we have events. And in this case, an event could be this movement has been packed, or it has been loaded, or it has departed, or it has arrived, or it has been delivered. Bunch of different things. So I'm now going to take you inside the data world, right? So far, you could transpose it into the real world. What does the data world look like? So on the very top, you see actually we're using web servers, nothing special about that. In this story, the removal company has one, the global mover has one, the airline has one, and the destination mover has one as well, right? So 4 different servers. You can find these colors on the rest of the screen as well. And what you see here on this screen is the data objects, the things that we manipulate in one record. And because of the color, for example, the shipment, which is on the left there, is on the server of the global mover. They have a server, that data and the packing list is with them. Whereas anything to do with the airline is with the airline, and anything to do with the destination mover is with the destination mover. Okay. So what are we seeing here? Right in the middle, that's the global mover that's handling a booking that came in from a removal company one, who's working with an organization, corporate ABC, who's working with Mr. John Smith, who actually needs to be moved. We also have a logistics agent, a global mover on the bottom left. We have a carrier and a logistics agent. And you can see how these parties relate to each other with these arrows, right? The key thing here probably is the packing list, and that's what we're going to focus on. So that is about the data. The data about what's being packed will be in the packing list, and it'll be on the server of the global mover, but everyone else has access. And so what happens? Sorry. Oh yeah, just a couple of things. I put an airline here, but at the bottom could have been a shipping line or a rail company. That doesn't really matter. It's completely interoperable. Okay, back to this example using the carrier. When the global mover has packed the goods, he or she will send an event, and that event is called packed. You can see it at the bottom of that logistics event list. There'll be another event loaded into the lorry, departed, arrived, etc. The carrier, same thing. When they have picked up the goods and they have departed the airport, they will send an event to the shipment. So that piece of data that lives on the internet can receive these events, and they're just appended to it. And on the other end, if you are interested in that information, for example, if you're the destination mover, you want to know that the shipment has been moved or has arrived at a certain destination, as well as the removal company. They also want to know that as the global mover. And so anybody can update the statuses of the data of these shipment, and anybody can subscribe to it as well. And that is where I'm just going to finish up here. Assuming that we sort of figured that one out, to implement it is actually a lot simpler than it may seem. I realized that in 20 minutes, if I haven't confused you, then either you haven't understood or I've done the first time ever an explanation that works. Neither probably are true. So the reality is that it's just technology. In order to make it work, we got a couple of web servers, maybe 2, 3, 4, even 1 would do it. We create a few web pages, just like the stuff you do on your website. One will be with the booking data, the other with the packing list, another one about seeing what events need to be sent, being notified, a couple of screens like that. And when we will put that together, you don't even have to understand really all the technicalities about how we move data around, the stuff I just presented. The reality is you're just looking at some screens on your computer that allow you to get full insight. And that visibility is provided to anyone that needs to have access to the information. So to implement it, if you wanted to run a pilot, for example, you just need a few stakeholders that are willing to try it out. We've done many of these pilots, more than 250 companies, more than 30 or 40 of these pilot implementations. Sometimes they take a week to implement, sometimes it takes 3 months to implement, but they're not big efforts. And so with that, Brian, my apology. I think I've talked 5 minutes too long. I'm going to give it back to you, and let's see if we can have some discussion around this.
Well, I appreciate it, Hank. It's obviously it's a complex issue and challenge, and it's not going to be an entirely simple solution that you can just buy off the shelf and implement it right away. It's important to show how it works, why it's different, why it's innovative, and why we're having this conversation in the first place. I think is really important. There's a bunch of good questions in the chat, and I have some things I'll kind of weave back in terms of implementation and pilot projects. But one thing that came up, we have a number of tech vendors, in our industry on the call, and I'll throw it over to I'll bring up Zach Ratner's question first, and I think you answered it, but I'm going to serve it back up to you so you can kind of emphasize the point here. So Zach asked, did IATA make an interoperability format similar to USB where devices from different vendors can talk to each other? Or is IATA actually hosting the data in a central hub? And he added just a further comment on there, just thinking about the privacy concerns.
Right. So I'm really happy you picked up on the USB, because that's what it is. There's certainly no central platform. This is a standard, just like the USB is a standard. And so anybody can host their own data. They have to host their own data somewhere, whether that's on their own server, on some shared server, or they use a third party, but your data is on the server of your choice or on the service of your choice. What IATA brings to the party, between quotes, is the standard, just like the USB. So we've designed a USB-like standard, and everybody that builds equipment implements it. But where the comparison is absolutely perfect is that just like USB, where you can connect a phone charger or a fan or another screen or whatever it is you want to do without your laptop getting confused, One Record allows you to connect any party to any party, exchanging any type of data without having to do any form of integration or implementation. That was part of the design, is we should be able to plug together any type of company with any type of company and communicate via the internet.
And I know certainly that was one of, our questions, our concerns when setting out on this data solutions initiative was we didn't actually know that a solution like One Record was out there. We thought IAM would either, the question was, do we host a data hub and take on all the responsibility and exposure that carries? Or do we just specify data protocols and standards for our industry? And it felt like neither was a great solution. And then One Record came up. So great question there, Zach. I want to go over to Taylor's question. And this is another kind of early dilemma that we wrestled with, because yes, Taylor, the technology is there. Most of the technology vendors in our industry have already solved this. But the issue remains that we are in a very fragmented industry, and each software company only has a small piece of the whole kind of industry and who they're providing service to. So Hank, I'll kick it back to you because you're further down the road with this issue. In the air freight sector, of course, there are mature technology companies who could provide this service to every stakeholder in the air freight and airline supply chain, I'm sure. But you had One Record came about for a reason. And how did you guys kind of go from, addressing that concern with your technology vendors to kind of setting up and standing up One Record?
Well, yes, and it's actually true that the technology vendors are partly behind why we started this. In the air sector, we have a handful of major providers that serve 90% of the industry, and another 300 that serve the rest, right? So there's a lot of different ones. Obviously, the little ones can't solve the problem for the whole industry. That's not going to happen. But theoretically, a few big ones could. If they were the size of Google, we wouldn't be talking. They would have done it already. But actually, they're not the size of Google. And so the big ones, I think they've all worked on solutions that work for their customer base. So if you own 50% of the market, now 50% of the market could, in theory, have a solution. But in practice, that is not what happened. These big solution providers made big investments 20 years ago to implement these electronic data exchange into their systems. Everybody's using it. Everybody's used to it. And as much as they are experts at technology and they can implement anything you want, they have no incentive to do so. They have a working solution. why would they change it? It's not that they're bad or not willing. It's just there's no incentive. And so none of them could talk to each other either. You talked about antitrust earlier on. These companies can't sit together and come up with solutions that they enforce. And IATA has a very unique position because we actually have antitrust immunity. We are allowed to have discussions that no one else can have because we serve the entire industry. Of course, we're under deep scrutiny by the lawyers and everyone else, but we can find global standards that serve everybody. And so what happened, Brian, is that almost all of the solution providers came into the room immediately with us when we said we're doing this, because this is also helping them. It also helps them to connect with new opportunities, new problems that they need to solve around sustainability, around data security, around whatever it is that even they can't do on their own. And so, a bit of a long-winded answer, but the ability to set a global standard can't be done by any single party, unless there is only one party. But if there was, then they would be fined with antitrust as well. So that wouldn't work.
Yeah, I think that's such a key point is kind of stepping back and saying, not only does this solve a problem that each of these software vendors have, they're each serving a population of clients who need to exchange data with their partners around the world. And some of those partners are not on the same software system. And we all know, Alvaro, you'll know, like it's a big investment to invest in that software relationship, to go through the implementation, to train your staff, to ensure that they're doing it. And then to change to another system is an awfully big change. And so we have that fragmentation ourselves. But the point you make is really important. A lot of our members are struggling to make that jump into technology, to adopt move management systems. And this will, I think, make it easier for them to make that jump up because theoretically, I think it will increase the ROI on that investment significantly if they're no longer having to do all the things that we identified earlier, the double data entry, all of that information, and share data seamlessly with their partners. Alvaro, I
Just
want to
one
give
little
you.
addition, perhaps, Brian. The IT solution providers are central in this process. They're the first to implement this and to work with each other. They're the first to integrate with custom systems. They're the first to be able to supply solutions to governments that need to integrate. No individual company, no matter how big they are, I'm talking about airlines in our case, will ever be able to really keep that, with the exception of less than 5 in the world. All the others rely on their solution providers for being able to do everything. So we still need that. That doesn't change. It's just a really much better standard for doing it.
Totally agreed. And I want to get on to Rajiv Jain's question as well. Rajiv asks, Hank, so the holder of data controls the data that they are publishing, assuming that a valid viewer of the data can copy the data into their own system.
Question being?
I guess the question is,
can we stop that?
Do they copy the data into their own system? No, they're just given access to the data, correct?
Yes, most of the time they're just given access. They can access the data and they use it for their purpose. Now, let's think about this for a second. Nothing stops somebody from making a screen copy. Obviously, they can copy the data. If you have a system talking to a system, which is the vision here. The vision is not that you and I start typing data, or this is towards a world where all of the data will be managed by systems to talk to each other with nobody in between. Of course, when a system accesses data that is hosted by another system, they could copy it, but they do not need to copy it or should copy it for the purpose of the process we're talking about. If in the world of air transport, if the shipper decides that the description of a good is wrong and changes it, or if he decides that the postal code of the customer is wrong, they can change that. If you've copied the data in the meantime, you're not going to pick up that change anymore. And so copying data is a bad idea. Doesn't mean we can protect it. We can only protect the the access to our data. What we can't ensure, and there's no system on the planet that can do this, is that people don't take screen copies or data dumps or stuff like that. That is not something, there are no systems in the world that can do that except using cryptology, and we are using that. But again, if you are allowed to see data, ultimately you could copy it. But this process doesn't need it. That's the main point.
Let me add to that. Companies using their move management software, they will want to copy it because all the business rules embedded on the software management in the move management software depends on that. Depends on
Yes.
I need to take this data.
Yes, correct.
But it's just instead of pointing it to your data in your server, the change over time would mean instead of pointing it to your database, point it to the one record, virtual record. So whenever it's an update, and you can set up rules that whenever the booker updates something, I can receive a notification, so I am aware, and I have to make sure that I get that in my system. But that's a change. Instead of pointing to your data, point to the virtual record, to the original data.
That's right. What changes is the official source of the data. And so, yes, of course, somebody needs to access the data, copy it, put it into their own system, in their own database, because, for example, when the destination mover needs information about the packing list for import customs reasons, perhaps they need that data. They might have to fill in a customs form for that purpose, and therefore they copy that data. But the source will still be the source. And so they will be automatically notified if there's been a change. They will then need to make sure that change gets taken to their system. But that is different from what happens today. Today, the data is copied, and every party that has the data becomes its own source for that data. And therefore, the data is no longer in sync. There's only one source here. But in practice, yes, IT systems, when you read something, you've already copied it. That's how the IT works. But the source is the key here, and the access to the source.
So there's still some information going on in the chat, and we are going to take this and kind of build it into an FAQ, I think. But I'm going to take back over control, Hank, because I am cognizant of the time our audience has spent with us today, and I want to drive us towards some actions. This isn't just something cool to learn about, and I think Hank's done a great job and Alvaro's done a great job of sharing with us kind of the current state of things and the potential future. But I want to activate all of you. I want to get all of you kind of helping and moving in a particular direction, because that's what we're here for. We're an association, and we bring people together to solve problems. And so here's where I'd like to encourage all of you to participate. And there's different ways you can participate depending on your role as a moving industry stakeholder. If you have your own proprietary system, we want to engage your top IT person at your company in this project. Can you participate in a pilot program? Can you demonstrate proof of concept with us? And similar, if you're a moving company with an outsourced system, you may not be operating your own system, but you have your relationship with your technology vendor. And there's a lot of technology vendors on the call today, and we want to get them engaged. Hank said it before. The big solutions providers are central to this. We have a few in the chat. Zach and Taylor are talking and asking questions. Rajiv has been with a tech vendor. We have a number of tech vendors on our task force. We need them to get involved and engaged in this project. And then finally, and let me not forget some of our other partners in the supply chain. It's not just moving companies. I know there was an auto transporter on the call. We had, insurance companies register for this event, creating companies, third-party accessorials. These companies need access to data as well. They have to provide data back to you. So every stakeholder in the moving supply chain needs to be involved. And depending on whether they have their own system or they outsource it, we're showing you how to get involved here. And then finally, clients. I see our friends from GSA are on the call. We want you to encourage your moving providers to engage in this. Clients want access to data. They want visibility. They want to see where the shipment is and get the data as soon as possible. Right now, we are a very fragmented industry with fragmented systems. One record holds the promise of cutting down on that data fragmentation and helping to bring that visibility much more to the fore. I'd encourage all of you to follow the data solutions page on LinkedIn. Charlie, if you can drop that in the chat, that would be great. That is going to be the chief place where we're messaging out to the industry on this initiative. And we just want to keep you informed, but also activate you so that you get engaged in this project. And then we're also, before you go, while we have you as a captive audience, we would ask you to complete a very quick survey. And Charlie, if you can put that up on the screen. Before you go, very, very much would appreciate if you can complete this. If you see a role for your company in helping to promote or get involved and engage in this, please answer this and give us who the right person is at your company, the right person or persons. Again, we will not go far unless we activate our community in this discussion. So I think we are 1 minute ahead of schedule here. Please, again, complete the survey. We will stay on for a little bit to talk if you have additional questions, and we can pull out some of the questions from the chat. But that is what we wanted to accomplish today, is to share the One Record concept with all of you and give you an idea of how you can engage with IAM in helping to bring about this future. So with that being said, I want to thank Alvaro and Henk for speaking today and your leadership, from the IATA perspective, Henk, and helping to guide us, and then Alvaro, of course, for your leadership and helping to bring that member perspective to what we're doing at IAM.